Good morning. Good morning to each and every one of you who is joining me for this live editorial class that is titled Editorial Edge and that StudyIQ IAS has come up with specifically and specially for you in English language. I'm Bhuvan and I welcome each one of you once again. Today is the 1st of June, so the new month has started and I will be in fact covering most of the information, most of the major news that was covered in May. That will also be covered by the end of this week. But today, we will take a look at 3 articles that have caught my attention that you should be aware of, especially the connotations around it, the different linkages around those 3 topics, especially from the mains perspective. It will be of immense benefit to you. So once again, I welcome each one of you. And once again, if you have any particular topics that you would like discussed, if you have any doubts, any grievance that you would like me to address, well, reach out to me. Send me your bouquets, your brickbats, your feedback, whatever you want in the comment box below or during the live chat. I'll be more than happy to take questions. Right, with that having been said, so we'll move on to the 3 articles that I have planned for you. The first one is obviously that you must have read about it. It must have caught your attention too, that on a day when China announced its manned space missions and that it will be going to the moon before 2030, all of that was said and which we will be covering. In fact, just last evening, there was a video that I had done on the United States versus China space war, the space race that is now developing. So on a day when China took a major step in that direction, insofar as challenging United States as a major space power is concerned, well, they announced another very important development. And so that is that, well, China is drilling 10-kilometer underground in oil-rich Xinjiang. Now, well, there are 2 connotations to this. There are 2 angles that you need to be aware of. One is obviously the underground bit, the geography bit, and the second is the IR bit, the international relations bit. So today, I will be taking a look at the IR bit in detail. Okay. So this is the first thing that we'll be doing. Second one is the Helmand water sharing dispute. Now, water wars are also supposed to be in the offing. You know, it's often said, in fact, if you read Hindu regularly, Indian Express, Financial Times, all these other think tanks, the major think tanks, the policy reports that they come up with, most of the independent researchers, analysts, they are of the view that the next major war will be fought on resources. And there are 2-3 flashpoints for that. 2-3 areas where they expect that to happen. One is obviously to do with India, China insofar as Brahmaputra is concerned. Second is India, Pakistan with Indus water is concerned. And then there is the third one now that is coming up, which is the Helmand water dispute. Now, it's a very intricate story, okay? If you look at it, it's a very intricate story. So, we'll do that too. And keep in mind this particular quote from the English language, which will help you understand this whole Helmand water dispute in one line. That the enemy's enemy is my friend, okay? So, well, prima facie, you might think that this is to do with, well, obviously, I'll tell you, it is to do with Afghanistan and Iran, okay? These 2 countries are fighting over the Helmand water dispute. But then you will find that the United States of America, okay, it is also playing or it already has played a role in making sure that this water dispute, picks up storm. It takes value in the coming days. So Afghanistan and Iran are the 2 countries. Well, obviously, you can't exactly say Afghanistan, you will rather say Taliban. So it's between these 2 entities, Taliban and Iran, are fighting over the Helmand water sharing dispute. We'll be covering that. And third is the topic that I had started yesterday, but due to paucity of time, I could not do it. Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Swati. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so the third one is to do with Sagarmatha. Okay, Mount Everest, as the Westerners call it. We call it Sagarmatha. So we are going to be looking at the environmental destruction, the ecological degradation of Sagarmatha Chomolungma, as it is also called, Mount Everest, again, the common name. So all of this, what's the ecological impact of massive tourists? How do you counterbalance the Nepal economy versus, say, the need to protect Everest or the higher Himalayas? Because you must be aware that, well, those areas have to do a lot with glacier movement. And glaciers, essentially, the Everest watershed, not just sustains Nepal, but also sustains the rest of the Indo-Gangetic plain. Okay? Directly or indirectly, whichever way you want to understand it. So it's of utmost importance for us to understand and take into account as to whether this massive over-exploitation of the Everest mountains, of the Everest watershed, all of that, what is the way forward? Because what is happening now is clearly not sustainable. Okay? So these are the three things, the three articles that I have planned for you. The first one is on Xinjiang. We will take a look in detail, in depth, as to what is the problem. What is China accused of? What is the relevance of that area? You know, if you look at Xinjiang, it's a very important area. It's a specific transit area also. If you have gone through history, you will realize that area is like, say, much like when we consider Afghanistan, that it was the entry point to the Indian subcontinent. Similar is with Xinjiang. So we'll take a look at all of these three things. First one, obviously, we will straight away jump into the topic for the day, which is to do with the Chinese aggression in the Xinjiang area that they have. Okay. So the question that you can expect in mains, or at least I would prepare if I were to be writing mains this year, is analyze the economic, geopolitical and strategic interests. Three particular points that the question asks you to cover. Economic, geopolitical and strategic interest that influence China's policies and actions in Xinjiang. This question, again, another question that UPSC could put forward with the same topic would be that analyze the dilemma that the international community has insofar as countering China's aggression and human rights abuses in Xinjiang is concerned. Why is it that the international community has been unable to do anything in spite of a massive amount of evidence that confirms that the Chinese government has indeed carried out atrocities? That's again a very polite word to what they're doing, but then atrocities at least on an innocent civilian population. Okay? So there are massive connotations to this. From the mains perspective, I would suggest that one prepares at least the economic, the political, the strategic and the international community dilemma. Why is it that no one has done anything? Okay? If these are prepared, these four are prepared, well, I think the Uyghur Muslim dispute, Chinese actions, whatever the type of questions that you might be thrown in the mains, you will be able to do it. Okay? So this is my question. Again, we'll first go through the lesson and then I'll come back to this question and we'll see how it goes forward. Okay? Right. So let's begin with this now. Firstly, you must be aware that Xinjiang region of China, well, it comprises the Uyghurs. Okay? You must have heard of the Uyghur Genocide, the exploitation of the Uyghur Muslims. All of these again point to the same set of people, the Uyghurs. So who are the Uyghurs and why is China now accused of genocide? What has indeed China done that these kind of serious accusations are being made against it? Okay? So first one we have to understand is that, well, Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic group. Okay? They're a Turkic ethnic group who are native to Xinjiang. They belong to that place. In fact, they have belonged there since centuries. It's not that they migrated all of a sudden and settled there. No, they have been there for a long time. And they are culturally linked to the region of Central and East Asia. Okay? Central and East Asia is where they have come from and they settled there eventually, say, hundreds of years ago. Now, please make sure that you take a note of this. Why? Because this has relevance to the actions of the OIC. Okay. You must be aware of the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. Okay. They claim to be the harbingers of all interests that are Islamic. Well, here is a classic example of hypocrisy. So we'll come to that hypocrisy first. First, let's understand the facts of the case. So, China is now accused of forced labor, sexual assault, torture, forced sterilizations and abortions. Yes, so this is actually hitting at the very heart of human dignity. In fact, if you were to read reports by the UNHRC, okay, the UNHRC came up with a report which essentially said that you must be aware now, China has the Han population, the majority Han population. So China has this state policy wherein they want to minimize or at least constrict the population of the Uyghur Muslims. So how do they do that? Obviously, killing them all would probably have massive international ramifications. So what's the long-term way to do it? How do you change the demography of a particular area without having bloodshed? Well, what they essentially do is that Chinese government incentivizes Han population to move into Xinjiang. There are incentives provided if a Han family decides one day to shift base from wherever they are located in mainland China, and then they go to Xinjiang. Now that's not it. This would have been acceptable. Well, fine. Everyone has the right to stay in wherever they want throughout the country. That's allowed. What's wrong with that? However, the problem arises when individual Han people are designated to stay with a Uyghur family, to keep watch over them. That's a kind of state surveillance. Okay? It's having a sort of a CCTV without the tech. It's human intelligence that China focuses on, encourages. So what they do is the Han man will go into the Uyghur family, the Uyghur house. And so if the Uyghur woman in the house was to conceive, well, information is given back to the CPC, or at least the nodal authority that is there in Xinjiang, and it is ensured that that baby never sees the light of the day. Abortions are frequent, sterilizations happen en masse, there are labor camps like Gulag. You must have heard the Russians had Gulag. Well, China also has labor camps. China is doing all of this essentially because this area is of vital strategic importance to it. We'll understand how, but first, let's understand what else they have done. So, Muslim religious practices have been banned and mosques and tombs have been pulled down. It's a direct assault at the heart of Islamic faith. Okay. Now, China says that, well, there are separatists and terrorists who want to destabilize the particular area, which is why it goes after these people. But then, if you were to go after individual people, that would make sense. Why go after the families? Sterilizations, abortions, sexual assault. How will that help combat terrorism? Okay. There is mass surveillance, checkpoints and barricades are the order of the day. In fact, you need permission from the Chinese state to even traverse 100 meters. There are barricades almost 100 to 200 meters down the road. Absolute control on the freedom of movement. That's not there. There is no freedom. There is no movement also. Forget freedom. Okay. And how does China justify all of this nonsense? Well, they say that it is counter-terrorism and re-education strategy. Re-education is how they put it. Re-education for them means banning religious practices and pulling down institutions of faith. China essentially wants to sinicize the area. Why? Because, well, these particular individuals, the Uyghurs, they come from a different native, they come from a different background. They're culturally very different to the Chinese. China doesn't appreciate that. China doesn't like that. Okay? Just like they want uniformity in political structure, they also want uniformity in the kind of people that serve that political structure. Okay? So if you look at it now, this is the capital, Urumqi. Urumqi is key. Why? Because it's at the center of BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative that you all must have heard of. You all must be knowing also. It's the centerpiece of President Xi Jinping's foreign policy. According to him, BRI is China's gift to the world. We must be thankful that China has come up with such an illustrious plan apparently. Okay, so Urumqi is key to BRI. How so? Let's understand that now. So you look at this area. This area is Xinjiang out of the whole of China. Immediately you can understand that it is at the western end of China, which means that everything from this side, everything westwards from here is essentially of relevance to China because they have a direct access. If they were to control this area and control this area well, they are going to make sure that they will have access to Iran, they will have access to Europe, which essentially the Chinese want. Chinese want stability so that they can economically dominate, which is why controlling Xinjiang is very important for the Chinese. Okay. Just imagine this, if they were to control this particular area, they don't need to go after Pakistan. The CPEC that we all hear of, well, this will become a secondary project essentially. Okay. Why? Because this area gives you direct access to Iran. This area gives you direct access to European ports. So all of this is of extreme importance. You have to see the larger picture as to why China has decided to do what it is doing. Okay. So the Uyghurs and the Han, well, essentially the Chinese government, they disagree on which group has greater historical claim to Xinjiang region. There is no agreement. It's essentially to do with identity. Who belongs to that area is what they conflict upon. So, well, the Uyghurs believe that their ancestors were indigenous to the area. Now, the government policy considers Xinjiang to belong to China since the Han dynasty. Look at the dichotomy here now. An area might have belonged to the Han dynasty as a part of China, and yet that area could also have had Uyghurs. These two are not mutually exclusive sets. However, China does not recognize that. China says, well, it's the Han population that should stay there because it was under the direct control of Han dynasty. Okay? So China classifies the Uyghurs as national minority. Now, if you have minorities in your country, in your territory, it is expected that some special allowances, some special facilities be given to them, as we call positive affirmation be provided to them. But in China, being China, well, they don't do any of that. Okay? They are considered to be no more indigenous to Xinjiang and have no special rights. There is no protection of minorities in China. It's the highway, it's the Han way in fact, or there's nothing else. You have to fall in line. You have to recognize yourself as a Han, or at least follow the methods and the ways of the Han. Individuality of, say, a person, a culture, things that we take pride in. India takes pride in its diversity. China does not like its diversity. Okay? So this is the problem, that they do not have special rights, that the conflict is essentially to do with who belongs to Xinjiang. And now with the coming up of BRI, well, China is in no mood to relent. It does not want to play games anymore. Iron fist, you must have heard of. That China operates with an iron fist. Well, the iron fist is most visible in Xinjiang region. Another region where the Chinese iron fist is most seen again is in Tibet. The Free Tibet movement, yes, which was essentially the thorn in the eye of China once upon a time, essentially has now withered down. Why? Because China has gone step by step in a calculated, methodical manner to make sure that the Tibetan cause is lost. The same strategy is being applied in Xinjiang also against the Uyghurs. Step by step, change the population. Make sure you erase anything that signifies or at least symbolically shows that the Uyghurs had a distinct culture, tradition. No, China doesn't want any of that. Okay? So this area, again, is of vital economic importance. And when you realize that Xinjiang, like I told you, the capital Urumqi, and the other one that you must know, especially from the prelims perspective, is the Alashankau port. Please make a note of this, guys. If you're watching this, make a note of these two particular areas, Alashankau port and Urumqi. Okay? Because UPSC has this funny habit of asking places and then asking you where do they come from? What's the problem there? Which area does it belong to? Make a note of it. So the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, that's the name of the place, is China's bridge to Central Asia and the Middle East and Europe. Now you see, add this with the BRI and it makes complete sense as to why China will do what it is doing. Why? Because it gives you access to Central Asia, it gives you access to the Middle East, and more importantly, it gives you access to Europe, where China has its eyes set. Again, it also gives you access to Africa. If you have reached the Middle East, well, how far is Africa from there? And you must be aware, or you must have read at least, that Chinese investments in Africa have doubled. You know, they're going all in to make sure that they colonize the African continent in their own manner. Wolf warrior diplomacy and depth trap diplomacy and all of that are used extensively to coerce African countries to agree to Chinese negotiation or Chinese demands. So we'll do that in some other class. But for the time being, understand this, that Xinjiang's human rights abuses is not just because, well, China does not like, say, the diversity or the culture or the tradition of the Uyghur Muslims, but also because it has an economic aspect to it. It has a geopolitical aspect to it, that it gives you access to the areas which are necessary for BRI to succeed, the Belt and Road Initiative to succeed. Okay? So it plays a vital role in the China's proposed BRI, framework of trade and infrastructure networks connecting Asia with Europe and Africa. Now, if this area were to be not, say, peaceful, not stable, so what are China's options? Consider for a moment, think and put yourself in the place of Xi Jinping. So if you realize that, well, Xinjiang is unstable, okay, we are not having complete control over that. For example, what are your options then? Number two is that you invest heavily in CPEC, in the Pakistan government, a government that does not have a particular, well, structure, no forum, no formation. At the same time, Pakistan has its own set of domestic problems. Baloch problem is there, right? So and again, if you were to do this, for CPEC to come to life, you are going to have to cut through Himalayas. Yes, you are going to have to cut through Himalayas to make sure that CPEC comes to life. That's going to be an expensive proposition. That's going to be not very cheap. And given that Pakistan does not have the money to fund from its own side, well, China will have to invest heavily inside there. So it makes sense economically also for China to make sure that Xinjiang is peaceful and stable, at least for the Chinese people, if not for the Uyghur people. For them, it is complete chaos. Okay? So the Alashankau port now. Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang. The second one is the Alashankau port. Now, port might give you the idea that, well, it has to do something with sea trade. No. This port is essentially a railway port. And it is the closest railway port to Europe. Think for a moment now. The cost of CPEC cutting through Himalayas versus the cost of a ready-made port, the Alashankau port, that gives you access to Europe. And now the Chinese actions against Uyghurs suddenly seem to make sense, that it is essentially all to do with the money. Okay, so the Alashankau port, also known as the Alatau Pass, please make a note of this, guys. Make sure you make a note of this. So this is China's closest railway port to Europe. In January 2020, cross-border e-commerce was launched and commodities like toys, products, clothing, all of this has started to go to Europe. So trade and commerce has already started. CPEC is still existing on paper, much of it at least. which is why China has gone all out. It cannot compromise on Xinjiang. Okay? Which is why you see all the atrocities that they do, the human rights abuses that they have been doing in Xinjiang. Yes? So that is necessary. That's necessary from the Chinese point of view to secure their interests. Now when you go forward and have a look at the global response. Okay? Again, if so much is happening against the Uyghurs, why is the international community silent? Or is the international community silent? So let's look at that now. Excuse me. So a report by the UN Rights Office found that China's arbitrary and discriminatory detention may constitute as crimes against humanity. Specific term, guys. Crimes against humanity is what the UN Rights Office says. Now, please understand, this report, okay, essentially did not please anyone. It did not please the Chinese. Well, why? Because they deny abuse. They are like, we are being targeted unfairly by the Western powers. The century of humiliation that China was subjected to continues till this date, is what they say. They play victim at the drop of a hat. And this report also did not please the Uyghur Muslims. Why? Because this report just classified it as crimes against humanity. It stopped short of calling it genocide. The G word was not used. The G word wasn't used. Genocide was not what the report said. So, you had this report which was like a damp squib. You know, it was just like a piece of paper which was not even worth the piece of paper that it was printed on. Why? Because neither it addressed the problem at its heart, neither it held China accountable, and nor it also spoke up for the Uyghur people in a manner that would fairly and accurately represent the truth on the ground. None of that happened. Absolute nonsense report. Okay? So, under the Rome Statute of the ICC, crimes against humanity. Now, what are crimes against humanity? Well, they are serious specified offences knowingly committed, that there is the plan in place, that it has got state sanction or at least sanction from some authority for crimes against humanity to happen. Okay? As a part of the widespread or systematic attack against a civilian population. So, widespread, systematic, these are the keywords. Okay? Crimes against humanity can be committed during peacetime as well as during armed conflict. Please make a note of this, guys. Especially considering the questions that came in prelims this time. Yes? You will need to know facts. You will need to know facts. You cannot escape anymore. That guess mastery, that I know one option so I'll solve the whole question, that's gone. So make a note of this, that well, crimes against humanity can happen both during peacetime as well as armed conflict, so long as they are directed against a civilian population. Why not an armed forces? Why not armed forces population? Why not that? Because for the armed forces, you have the Geneva Convention, which essentially says how prisoners of war must be treated, how war must be fought, what are the ethics involved in wars and battles. So this is specifically to do with the civilian population, right? So this is the global response so far. And then we had this particular report that came out, the 51st regular session of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Okay. Now this report, essentially, there was a voting held on a draft resolution on the human rights situation, and interestingly or surprisingly, whichever way you want to look at it, this motion was rejected. Okay. China triumphed, 19-17 the final count. Okay. India was the one that abstained. Why did India abstain? Now, understand this in a very simple manner. Okay. Human rights are of sacrosanct importance in the Indian context. Okay. We have Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, the tenets, the philosophy by which our foreign policy is guided. So human rights are of importance, absolute, sacrosanct importance for the Indians, for us at least. Now, China wants to play the double game on the international scale. So what it does, on one hand, it will subjugate a population, a civilian population, with at least what we know is crimes against humanity. But what we do know is that, well, it was a genocide. And on the other hand, they will point fingers at other countries. Okay? India does not play that game. Why? Because human rights are at the core, the tenet of our philosophy. And so India believes that, well, a naming and shaming exercise on the international forum, it has no tangible outcomes. Neither for the people who are the victims and nor for the country whom we are trying to hold accountable. So make a note of this, that India is against naming and shaming exercise. Okay? This is the central point of the Indian position. India does not believe that pointing fingers at an international platform will lead to any positive outcome for any party. It always says that, well, all these disputes have to be solved through conciliation, through talks. Figure out a way amongst yourself. It's a domestic problem of China. It's an internal problem of China. And in return, well, China also turns a blind eye to the alleged Indian atrocities that it may or may not be committing. We cannot independently verify that. Okay? So this is a sort of quid pro quo that exists between China and India. Now this quid pro quo, wherein you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, this was recently tested when India abrogated the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. So as expected, Pakistan was up in arms, saying, oh, how can you do this? How can you do this? Interestingly, at that time, China also came in and said, you know what? Yes, you can't do this. Why? Because again, they had an economic aspect linked to it. CPEC was supposed to go through the illegally occupied POK. Okay? The rail link that they are bringing down from Xinjiang to Gadar, that was supposed to go from Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So for a moment, China came up and said, you know what? India, how can you do this? Straightforward, next day, the Ministry of External Affairs held a press conference and politely reminded China that, well, you have skeletons in your own backyard. Have a look at them first. Straightforward, the Chinese backed down. So this quid pro quo, again, is not permanent. It is specific, it is time specific, and it will change in the future because geopolitics, nothing is permanent. What's permanent today will be temporary tomorrow. Right? So this is what happened. India abstained in line with its long-held policy of not voting on country-specific resolutions, which is why India does not take a specific stance in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Normally, you will see India abstaining from there too. Same thing happened in the case of the Chinese also. India abstained. Why? Well, firstly, we do not vote on country-specific resolutions, especially to do with human rights. And obviously, naming and shaming exercise has no benefit for any party. Okay? Now that this has been understood, let's understand and go back to the question now. Now that we know the crux of the issue at least. Okay? Now the problems here. Analyze the economic. So what are the points that you will include here? You will talk about Chinese projects, the BRI. In geopolitical, you will talk about access. In strategic, you will talk about access to Europe and Africa and Middle East. In geopolitical, you will talk about the Chinese emergence. All of these will eventually form the crux of your answer. Okay? So, this is the first topic that we had. Again, the second question that I told you, if you were to ask to analyze the international dilemma, as to why the international community has not done anything so far. Well, you will speak about the UNHRC report as well as the draft voting. The draft voting. Okay. If the question asks you about the Indian dilemma, well, you know that there are two specific points. Why the Indians behaved, why the Indians abstained. Well, the reasons are amply clear. So that would form the crux of your mains answer. You have to come from the root of the problem, analyze it from these three perspectives, end with the Indian outlook, and then probably suggest measures. So what are the measures? If China is to be held accountable, well, what would be the first step? The logical step. So if you are, say, in place of Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of UN. So if you are tasked with this assignment that, hey, go ahead and tell me, give me a report or give me a plan of action against China. The first thing would be to have an independent team go verify the situation on the ground. This is easier said than done though, because the United Nations HRC, the Human Rights Commission, did send a advanced team, a forward team to go and figure out, okay, see for yourself what's happening in China. They were essentially led to that tour, okay, under intense surveillance and absolute control of the Chinese government. So again, the facts are manufactured for these people to see. However, this would be the logical first step with a caveat that, well, you cannot have Chinese oversight. It needs to be independent in totality. It cannot go there with a Chinese person looking over and seeing, okay, what is this committee doing? You cannot do that. Second would be to probably assess what has happened so far. An independent team should support its observations with a report, which should be evidence-based. Okay, an evidence-based report basically categorizing what are the problems there, how many lives have been lost. Let's have an estimate of that first. How many of those Uyghur Muslims are in concentration camps, prisons, or as Chinese say, re-education camps? Only then can you launch a strategy to counter the problem. Right now, the facts of the case, like I told you, we do not know numbers. The facts of the case are vague. How are you going to hold China accountable if you do not know the facts of the case? This Chinese cloak of secrecy that they have on every aspect of their existence, it is not beneficial. It's in fact very harmful for the existence of the Uyghur Muslims. All right. So that is the first question of the day, the first topic of the day, wherein we were essentially talking about the Chinese, well, drilling is what the news wants you to read. That, well, an underground drill is happening. Well, fine, okay. That happens across the world. The Chinese are not the first to do it. Okay. In fact, the deepest mine, the deepest drill is in Russia. Okay. So this is not much importance from the point perspective of mains really. But from the mains perspective, this is a burning topic. Why? International relations. So this is the first topic that we have done. If you have any questions, any doubts, any clarifications, shoot me a question in the comment box. I will be more than happy to answer. All right, I'll wait for 10 seconds and then we'll go forward for the next topic. Any question that you would like. All right, so since nothing has come, we will move on to the next topic. Now, the next topic is about the Helmand water sharing dispute. Like I told you, water wars is going to happen. Resource-based conflict or conflicts on resources, over resources, is going to be a flashpoint in the future. It's going to happen at some point or the other. Human population is burgeoning. You have resources that are getting depleted day by day. Eventually, once you push a country to a corner, it is going to come and bite back at you. This is essentially the problem with Helmand water sharing dispute also. So let's straight away jump into this particular topic now. Okay. So, the two most unlikely nations to be fighting a water dispute. Again, UPSC will love this kind of questions. Helmand water dispute. And if they put these two countries, well, the uneducated or the unaware may never think of marking these two. Well, who would think that, well, there would be a water dispute between these two countries? It would probably be all kosher, would be the first interpretation. However, this is the source of the problem. So, Helmand River, which essentially rises somewhere in the Hindu Kush. Let me just clear it up so that you can have a better look at what I'm trying to convey. So, Helmand is a river that starts from the Hindu Kush, goes side of Kabul, then a place called Lashkar Gah, and then finally into Iran. So, this is the course of the river. Okay. So, it rises in the Hindu Kush mountains, flows across Afghanistan and branches just before Iran. You look at it here. There is one part that is going this side, which is becoming the part of the border between Afghanistan and Iran, and the other branch goes directly into Iran. Two facets to the river Helmand. So it splits into these two entities. Now make a note of this too. Shele Charak, which forms the border between Afghanistan and Iran. So this is Shele Charak, and the one that goes in is called the Sistan River. This area also is called Sistan, Sistan. Okay, another, like you must have seen PYQs of UPSC. They'll keep asking you, where are these hills found? Where is this area found? Sistan, have an idea. Helmand River, have an idea. Okay, so you have three entities here: Sistan River, Shele Charak, and the Hindu Kush mountains. Now that you know this, the course of the river, and that one particular branch of the river forms a boundary between Afghanistan and Iran. Now let's go forward and have a look at the problem. So the problem essentially comes down to the Afghanistan-Iran Water Treaty. This treaty essentially, when you read it the first time, it seems and it appears to be very one-sided. Okay. Why? We shall inquire now. So this stipulates that Afghanistan must deliver water to Iran, an annual average of 820 million cubic meters under normal conditions. Which means if there is no drought, if the rainfall is as expected, or if at least the water in the river is as expected, well, you are going to supply this particular amount to the Iran government, the Iran state. Now, the 1973 treaty, the treaty that was signed in 1973, it ensures that Iran has access to the river. Afghanistan has complete ownership. Important to note. Very important to note that the treaty explicitly stating that, well, yes, Iran will get some water, but then the absolute ownership of this river is with Afghanistan. Okay. So, Afghanistan shall retain rights to the balance of the water, and then they will use it as the way they choose. Article 5 of that treaty also states that Iran cannot make any claims to any excess water, even if it may be available in the Helmand Lower Delta. This is the maximum that Iran can get, and no more, regardless of whether there is excess supply. In case the supply goes down, well, then this goes down too. But if the supply goes up, this is the maximum you're going to get, no more than that. A skewed treaty, a skewed agreement. You know, an agreement should be one that should serve both parties fairly, equally at least. Not a fair agreement, not a equitable treaty. Okay, so this is the issue now. So situation now, when did it come to such? When did it essentially flare up, this whole problem? Essentially it flared up when the Kamal Khan Dam was built by the Afghanistan government, which meant that the drought-ridden Iran, well, they claimed that the dam is going to cut off water from them. that they will have limited access now. And Afghanistan justifies saying, you know what, we need it for our own internal purposes. Agriculture, irrigation, whatever, XYZ. So Iran is essentially saying, you cannot barricade water. Give me the minimum amount of water that you have at least said, 820 million cubic liters. This should be given, cubic meters. Okay. But then Afghanistan is not keeping its side of the bargain. Now the situation also has exacerbated with 97% of Iran dealing with drought of some magnitude or the other, which is why suddenly this issue has come to focus. Firstly, the dam, the KK dam, plus Iran's own environmental concerns, plus the skewed treaty. All of these have added to the problem. Now, I had told you right at the very beginning that United States also has a particular tangent to this problem. So, I'll tell you now how. Okay. The enemy's enemy is my problem, is my enemy, is my friend, I had told you. Yes. The enemy's enemy is my friend. So, what the United States very cruelly in fact has done is when they were vacating Afghanistan, so they left on purpose all their weapons, their equipments, everything. You must have seen large Hummers and big weapons and armory and all of that, arms and ammunitions left behind by the Americans saying, you know what, it will be too expensive to take back to my country. That's the reason they gave. It wasn't expensive when they shipped all of it in, but it will be expensive if they have to ship it all out. Okay, we'll agree to that, fine. But now all of that heavy armor and all those missiles and Hummers and all of that, it is in the hand of Taliban. And the Taliban are now headed towards Iran. Okay. With the intention that if Iran takes any coercive action regarding the Helmand Water Treaty, well, they will respond back. Essentially, the US making sure that the vacuum is not essentially a vacuum, that there will be a conflict of sorts, keeping that it will be a place where there will be conflict happening in the days to come. Climate change is a reality, all of us know that. That rivers will eventually dry up, or there will be areas of excess rainfall, surplus rainfall will be there, all of that is expected. So with this particular move of leaving all their arms and ammunitions in the hands of Taliban, what they have essentially done is pit Iran, against which the United States anyways has a major grouse, and they have pitted Taliban, against which the United States also has a major grouse. No winners here in this conflict except Big Joe. He is the one who is going to be laughing all the way. However, please understand that this is essentially the start of the problem. The days ahead will tell us more about the Taliban strategy and how Iran negotiates or probably goes all in or all out against the Taliban. But prima facie, one cannot ignore the American complicity at least in making sure that this particular crisis flares up. Okay. So this brings to the end the second topic that I had for you. It's already, okay, I have 10 minutes, so we'll quickly do the Everest one. But then if you have any questions regarding this too, please make sure to leave me a comment or a question, and I'll be happy to get back to you. And if you're enjoying this, if you're liking this particular discussion, this analysis, please leave me a like or a comment. I'd appreciate that too. Okay? All right. So now we'll go forward and we will look at the last article for the day. The last article is to do with the top of the world. The top of the world, Sagarmatha, Chomolungma. Yes, Sagarmatha is the name that is by the people of Nepal. Chomolungma is by the people of Tibet, and Mount Everest by the Westerners. And well, for some reason we also call it, so fine. Okay. So, Sagarmatha National Park. Now you have the Everest and you have the national park here. People come to Kathmandu, land in Kathmandu. Now you must be aware that Nepal's economy is essentially tourist dependent. Okay, since it is landlocked, it's essentially the whole trade and commerce has to go via India. Well, China is also making inroads now, massive inroads. Again, a topic we'll deal with some other day. But then it's essentially a tourist-backed economy. So anyone who comes to Kathmandu is essentially going to go to Sagarmatha National Park or an area called the Mustang. Okay, these are the two most commonly frequently visited areas. This is not the car, by the way. Okay, but in another area called the Mustang. So anyone who goes here, now what are the facts and figures here? Firstly, the Sagarmatha National Park, this particular area, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In the year 1979, it was designated as an area of ecological importance. Its heritage was there to be conserved. It wanted to be conserved, needed to be conserved. So this particular national park receives 1 lakh visitors per year, tourist-based economy of Nepal, which is why they need to be accommodated. Where will they stay after all? Okay, it's an unhabitable area, it's forests, it's mountains, massive amount of deforestation to make tourist lodges and guest houses for these 1 lakh tourists that come in. Step number 1 of ecological degradation. Thereafter, once you go ahead from the park, you have the Everest Base Camp. Okay, you must be aware that Everest has 2 particular approaches, the South Col and the North Col. Okay, and one particular area or one particular aspect of Everest that you should be aware of is the Khumbu ice fall. Okay, very important again from the aspect of these particular examinations, the Khumbu ice fall or the Khumbu glacier is also what it is called as. This is essentially a treacherous part of the whole Everest hike, Everest ascent, where most of the casualties happen. At the same time, you will be surprised to know that if you are going to climb Everest, you are not vulnerable when you are climbing upwards. Why? Because your mind is at its sharpest. You are looking towards a goal. So most of the casualties don't happen when you are going up. In fact, when you are coming down is when most of the people lose their lives. What are the reasons? Number 1, you are tired. Mentally you are tired. Physically you are exhausted. Number 2, your oxygen cylinder that you carry with yourself is depleting because most of the oxygen is taken at the top of the Everest. So which is why it is said that when you're going up, you're not at risk at all. Not much risk at all, in fact. But if you're coming down, your risk factor insofar as perishing along the slopes of Everest is the highest. So now coming back to the topic. So you have this base camp that people use as a stopover or as a base to make sure that they climb towards Everest. That gets 500 visitors per day. Imagine an area of serene importance, serene climate, peaceful climate, and yet you have 500 people per day, tourists, just visiting the base camp, not even looking to climb the Everest. They just want to see the base camp. How does it look like? Okay. 600 people attempt to summit Sagarmatha in peak season. You must have seen of these massive queues along waiting to climb Mount Everest, waiting to climb Sagarmatha. It is again to do with burgeoning tourist influx. There is no regulation. If you pay a particular amount, you are qualified to go ahead and climb Everest. Physical fitness, they'll take care of. Essentially, you are going to climb Everest because the Sherpa will help you climb Everest. It's not because you can climb Everest. Okay. So 600 people attempt to summit Sagarmatha, and again for every climber who goes there, you are going to go with your entourage. Now this says that, well, you will have a local worker, which is essentially a Sherpa. Okay, they are the most ablest of climbers, the most fittest of individuals that you will ever find. Some of them also serve in the Indian Army. You will also find Sherpas in the Darjeeling Hills and Sikkim Hills. Okay, in fact, you will be surprised to know, in fact, you shouldn't be surprised to know that Darjeeling Hills and Sikkim Hills hold a massive population of Sherpas and Limbus and Tamangs and Gurungs, all of these people, the most fittest that you can ever find, acclimatized to the extreme conditions of the Himalayas. So you are going there with equipment and guides, and what essentially happens now? Imagine the number of people going in to an area of sensitive ecological importance. Plastic management is not there. Forget segregation. Plastic is abundant. Human defecation, abundant. Now what happens is, because of this massive influx of people, the Sagarmatha National Park and the Everest watershed, they are getting compromised. You have human defecation, you have deforestation, you have plastics, all of this together leading to the ecological degradation of what is indeed a very sensitive area. You must have heard of rivers originating, massive rivers that originate from that particular area. You are going to threaten the very heart of the problem. Okay? So now when you go forward, you look at it. This is the amount of trash that a person generates. So if you're there for say 2 weeks, okay, from the Everest base camp to the summit and back, and then back to Kathmandu, if it's a 2-week expedition that you have gone for, you are looking at least 8 to 10 kgs of waste per person. Like I told you, you are not going alone, you are going with your entourage, a cook, a Sherpa, a guide, all of that together. Individually, a group's waste roughly can come up as high as up to 200 kgs. This is just waste I'm talking about. A group, a mountaineering summit group that they want to go, an expedition if it is going, 200 kgs of waste per group can be created. Where are you going to dispose that? Multiply this with the number of people who attempt. Okay. Say 500 groups going for a particular ascent. Unimaginable amount of waste. Okay. So discarded empty oxygen canisters, tents, food containers, human feces, all of this littered along the path. Everest was supposed to be clean and green. You are in the lap of nature. However, it's like any other place that you can find across wherever you are. So litter is spilling out of glaciers. Camps are overflowing with piles of human waste. Imagine that. You are going to climb Mount Everest. You wake up in the morning with your cup of tea and you smell human feces. Okay. Climate change is causing snow and ice to melt, exposing even more garbage that has been covered for decades. Okay. This poses a serious health risk to everyone. Why? Because you are hitting the water sources. You are contaminating the water sources with your waste materials, with your plastics, with your oxygen canisters, all sorts of waste and whatever is you're throwing, littering on the ground. You're contaminating your water sources. How good thought is that? How intelligent is that? No, not at all. Okay. So anyone now, what did the Nepali government do finally? When push came to shove, even they had to regulate that economy, that particular sector that was running their economy. And what did they do? Well, they said that will give us a security deposit. When you come back from your expedition, bring the amount of waste and take your security deposit back. How did people get around this? Quite easy. You must have figured out. Throw the waste wherever. Before you take your deposit, just take random waste and go and submit it there. Often people from Kathmandu would take litter from Kathmandu, submit it, take their $4,000 security deposit and back home. Everest, dirty again. So this strategy failed. So now that I come back to the question, what would be the best way forward? Would you have Nepal's economy be compromised by, say, completely banning this whole industry? No, that's not going to happen. Too many lives are at stake here. There needs to be regulation of some sort and not something as simple and manageable as this. People easily found a way around this. Right? So these are the facts of the case, especially when you look at the Everest watershed. What is the problem and what are the solutions? Well, it's not very difficult for you to imagine now. All right? Okay. So with that, my dear students, aspirants, if you like this whole class and analysis, I would once again request you to please leave me a like or a comment. I'd really appreciate that. And I will see you tomorrow morning with another set of questions and another set of articles that you should be able to analyze and think over and ruminate over as you prepare for your mains in the September, October, whenever it is to be held, and prelims next year. Make sure that you take a note of all the information that is coming out of here. Maintain a copy and a pen, and it should be holding you, it should hold you of immense benefit in the time and days to come. And if you have any particular question that you would like for me, well, here is my email ID. If you would like my guidance, or if you just want to reach out to me and chat about who won the Champions League or who won the Europa League, I'm all up for that too. Okay. Meanwhile, have a look at this question and let me know of your answers in the comment box below. All right. Thank you, everyone, whoever watched it. Thank you for being so patient, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Good day.